To another episode of the National Security Space Association's SpaceTime interview series. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us today. My name is Chris Williams, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of NSSA's Moorman Center for Space Studies. We at NSSA are proud to uphold the name and legacy of our dear friend and mentor to many, General Tom Moorman. We are honored to have with us today Colonel Donald Brooks. Sir, welcome. Colonel Brooks is commander of the 1st Space Brigade, U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. The 1st Space Brigade conducts space operations to deliver decisive combat power in support of the Army and joint warfighting communities. Headquarters in Colorado Springs, the brigade supports joint forces in their critical dependence on space capabilities and products through the unique mission sets of its subordinate battalions and associated unit battalion. Colonel Brooks is a 1999 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree and was commissioned in the field artillery. He has operational deployments to Operation Desert Spring and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Colonel Brooks became a Space Operations Officer in 2008 and was assigned to the Joint Navigation Warfare Center at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. From July 2017 to June 2019, he commanded the 1st Space Battalion. Most recently, Colonel Brooks established U.S. Space Command's Space Integrated Planning Elements at both U.S. Special Operations Command and U.S. Central Command. Colonel Brooks holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in Earth remote sensing hyperspectral imagery with a minor in astrodynamics from the Florida Institute of Technology. In terms of our format today, Colonel Brooks will make some opening remarks, then we will turn to question and answer. I'll have a few questions to start, but if members of our audience would like to pose a question to Colonel Brooks, please do so by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I will endeavor to get through as many of your questions as possible in the allotted time of 60 minutes today. Without further ado, it's my great honor to welcome Colonel Donald Brooks. Sir, thank you for your outstanding service to our great nation, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, sir. I really do appreciate this opportunity, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Not only you, Chris, but to everyone online or everyone that's going to join us later virtually, I really do appreciate this opportunity to share with you the great work that Army space soldiers are doing today, and we're really where we look to go in the future. One of the things that always that catches me off guard is it does sound odd when we use Army and space together. Most of the time, when we use them in the same sentence, most people don't realize that we do actually have Army space soldiers. As they think that used to be the Air Force, but now the Space Force has considerable responsibilities in the space domain, and they're quite surprised to even hear that we've been in existence, Army space professionals, for at least the last almost 22 years. And all of these professionals have really been dedicating themselves to integrating space capabilities into warfighting operations, actions, activities, investments, and to support joint multinational forces. Within my brigade itself, we do have an active reserve and National Guard battalions. And we actually do have a satellite operations brigade that will eventually, later on this year, transition over to the Space Force. But these space professionals in the Army are, they're integrated into U.S. Space Command, Space and Missile Defense Command, I should say. We actually have space professionals in multi-domain task forces, Army divisions and corps, and theater and joint command, special operations, along with various labs and industry and other organizations truly focused on improving space integration at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of warfare. And also, not to forget, we have several Army astronauts that are currently in the fight and doing great things for NASA. And a few, I just met recently Colonel Drew Morgan as they continue to prepare for their missions in space. So why is it important? I would say, and I would argue, that space is a global common. As we all, I think, all understand and really appreciate that aspect, that it is a natural resource that connects most facets of humanity, to which threats affect all, not just one specific aspect. With that in mind, I would say the DoD, truly understands that, as we've seen the creation and activation of Space Force and Space Command, and we have an appreciation that space is that strategic demand, and that the U.S. must maintain peace through strength in space, as that freedom of maneuver and to operate in that domain is never guaranteed. So once again, just to try to provide a quick snapshot of what we do here in the brigade. Small in numbers, just a little under 1,500 soldiers in this organization, but very, very large in terms of responsibility, capability, and integration. So with those, 1,500, roughly 1,500 soldiers, we execute critical no-fail missions, 24/7, 365 days a year, across 16 locations in 10 different countries within 6 different time zones. I'll often say the sun truly never sets on this brigade, as we are the operational arm for Space and Missile Defense Command. In my 2 years commanding the 1st Space Battalion, and now my almost 7 months of commanding the brigade, we've had soldiers in teams, detachments, companies, and other various elements deploy to and integrate with NATO commands, Army divisions and corps, Marine Expeditionary Forces, Air Force Operations Centers, and Special Operations. We've had soldiers deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Norway, Korea, Japan, Hawaii, Germany, and a few less desirable places like Italy. That's a rough one for our soldiers when they go there. But every day of my command, whether at the battalion and now at the brigade, I've had soldiers deployed forward or forward stationed, supporting European Command, Central Command, Pacific Command, Korea, Special Operations Command, and now Space Command. Excuse me. What do? They're really bringing warfighters and those commanders an asymmetric advantage in that space domain. Truly quiet professionals in the shadows, enabling that joint and multi-domain warfighter to be more effective and efficient in their ability to shoot, move, and communicate. Other than that, we do, so why is it important for us in the Army, and why do we share such a huge responsibility in the space domain? As I mentioned before, it is a domain that we must protect and defend. Our freedom of access and freedom of maneuver within, and we see those threats that grow significantly by leaps and bounds daily. It's evident that our adversaries have studied our way of warfare and have figured out a way that they can try to remove some of those advantages that we have gained and maintained in space for many, many years. And I think they truly realize that, and I think we do as well, that that's somewhat of an Achilles heel. And for us in the Army, more than 70% of the Army's key weapon systems and equipment, with well over 250,000 pieces of equipment in the Army, rely on the position, navigation, and timing data provided by GPS. I would say, consequently, those potential adversaries have worked to develop capabilities and strategies to negate that advantage in the space domain, as those capabilities are a central component across all domains: air, land, sea, cyber, and space. I did my War College research paper focused on the A2AD strategy of Russia, and it's well, indoctrinated in their methodology or their strategy to remove our ability to see, to hear, and to communicate at the beginning of phase 1 or combat operations, if we ever were to move from great power competition into great power conflict. And so, every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine is space enabled. And therefore we have to focus on, as an organization, how to maintain or gain and maintain that freedom of access and maneuver by, with, and through the space domain. So, I think we all understand that freedom of action and lethality on the battlefield is directly tied to space-based capabilities. And that ability to operate effectively and efficiently in those denied, degraded, disrupted space operating environments is absolutely fundamental in our focus and our future operations. As such, the soldiers, and I have Marines now in my brigade, the soldiers and Marines in this organization have begun training and preparing to fight in and through those D3 SOE environments, the non-degraded disruptive space operating environment. We do that not only here at home station, we go forward into combat training centers, and we also go forward into large-scale exercises, whether that be to the various geographic combatant commands. Without question, supremacy in space is critical to allow commanders to dominate multi-domain operations. And I say the Army is definitely moving in the right direction with the design of the multi-domain task forces the movement towards project convergence, and then ultimately, as we see it in space, moving to formations that have space capabilities integrated, not only laterally across the staffs, but vertically at echelon through the entire commands. And sir, and to the audience, pin your questions. I enjoy much more conversation than I do, talking deep diving into the organization, and really want to focus on areas that y'all would like to hear about.
That's fantastic. Thank you for your introductory remarks. And again, before we went live, we were talking about your very diverse background, which underscores first question here, which is that the Army, as embodied in you and your background and experience, brings some unique skills to national security space. What is it about Army space professionals that's valued most in the joint space arena? And how does the Army develop and sustain those critical skills? And then if you don't mind, I'll continue the line of questioning. Our association, the National Security Space Association, has a workforce development initiative that looks at being able to identify talent in high school and earlier, and seeking to promote STEM education and other activities to try to make sure we have a good pipeline of the best and brightest that come into the national security space business. So second question is, do you have any comments on that aspect? How do we sustain that quality force, that talented force, that well-educated force that you embody, sir?
Yes, sir. Let me write that second down as a reminder. Yes, sir. So for me, what's what I have seen and experienced and been able to, live firsthand of, what's valued about Army space professionals, not just in the Army formations, but joint formations and coalition formations. And sir, I'll say, my background is in artillery. As you mentioned before, I was in the artillery for 10 years before I switched over to space operations. And so for me and the other Army space professionals, before we assess, to the space operations field, we spend anywhere between 4 and 10 years at that tactical operational level, integrating our particular, profession or military occupation specialty within movement, maneuver, the warfighting functions, I should say. And so as we transition or ascend to become space operations officers, that's what we bring with us, is that tactical and operational knowledge and experience. And so as we go and integrate with Army formations or joint formations or coalition formations, we have this inherent ability to translate. As one of my, when I was at Special Operations Command South, my J3 always, one of my favorite compliments was, Don, you're really good at translating geek to grunt and grunt back to geek. And I took that as a compliment. And to hear that from a special operations, senior leader that said, hey, you really help integrate space across all the warfighting functions, and you know how to communicate that to commanders and their subordinate commanders, help them understand the environment. So when it comes to evaluating risk, they make the best decisions based on what they understand the risk to be. And so as space professionals, Army space professionals, it's exactly that, being able to take our operational and tactical experiences and bring space to the warfighters across the warfighting functions. And I say the joint warfighting functions. It's movement, maneuver, it's fires, protection, sustainment, information, intelligence. Those are all command and control. Sorry for the seventh one. Those are all critical on how we fight today and in the future. And it's why I think we as the Army space professionals bring such a good complementary effort to the Space Force, as they have very, very technically adept space professionals within their ranks. And I think it's us working together between the Army Space Forces or space professionals and the Space Force professionals where we complement each other well. And then how do we sustain that, sir? That's a great question. It's one of the things that I think we as Space and Missile Defense Command within the Army, we have really been putting forth a lot of effort. And it's not just the outreach into the colleges, but it's beginning to, it's really getting to kids, to young men and women, I should say, while they're in high school. and stressing the importance of those STEM degrees and focus on, where that can take our country as we move forward, as we've learned through many, many years that, the research and development that happens in the Army transcends into the civilian world, and from the civilian world can transcend into the Army, or into the DoD, I should say, and make things better. So for us, we do a lot of outreach. I actually just returned a couple weeks ago from West Point, where we were at Branch Week, where all of the cadets, they spend a week and they learn about all the branches and the functional areas, and getting to talk to cadets about space operations and what it means for the Army now and into the future, and getting them excited where we're going, where we are now, where we're going to go. Critically important, and I think that's how we continue to sustain that the talent pool across the Army. I still think we're doing it in the right way, with letting these men and women grow up in that tactical operational levels first, and then they assess over. And I think that's our plan across the Army, is to continue to let that happen. We don't have what we call in the Army branch transfers, where young men and women, after they get commissioned in the artillery or the infantry, a few years later they can transfer over to military intelligence or vice versa. That's a branch transfer, which we call, since we're a functional area in the Army, we call it the Assured Functional Area Transition, AFAT for short. And so where these men and women, they can apply for it, they'll go through an interview, and if they're selected at their 4 to 7 year mark, it's a guarantee that they can VTIP or transition from their basic branch over to space operations.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I should mention to our audience that the National Security Space Association is extremely blessed to have a very active and distinguished board of advisors. And one of the members of our board of advisors, Army retired Brigadier General Tim Coffin, was involved in helping prepare for this event. And General Coffin, if you're watching today, thank you for the assistance in pulling this together, and for the questions that you submitted. So if you get stumped by a question, Colonel, you know who to go after. So thank you, General Coffin. Appreciate it very much. Sir, when you look back at your career, what are some of the key experiences that enable you to be successful in your current role? In particular, can you tell us a little bit more about the duties and importance of the space liaison elements that you helped establish at U.S. Special Operations Command and U.S. CENTCOM as well? We hear a lot about the liaison functions, the liaison elements, and the value that they bring, but we don't have a lot of insight into what exactly they do. And so if you could shed some light on that as well, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
No, my pleasure, sir. And thank you for that question. As far as, what my background and some of those key experiences, I talked about my artillery years earlier. Since my artillery days, becoming a space officer, some of those key things, those key positions that enabled, I think, me to be successful where I am today. I've always prided myself in really being a pathfinder for the space community. And so I was the first space officer at the Joint Navigation Warfare Center, understanding navigation warfare, understanding how we use GPS and where our reliances are. Sometimes single points of failure could be really critical, once again, to talk to commanders how those D3 SOE, that environment, what that's going to do to us and how we could fight through it. I left there. I went to Special Operations Command South down in Homestead, Florida, as the one and only space officer and the first space officer in any of the theater special operations commands. And there I really got to apply my trade and to integrate space across those warfighting functions. A little bit higher than tactical. We were more at the operational and lower strategic levels. And so it let me grow and develop a little bit higher than I'd been used to in my tactical years as an artillery officer. And I think all of that led to me eventually going to grad school and then, taking the Space Battalion for a couple of years. And once again, let me get a little bit higher in the operational, a little bit higher in the strategic side of the house, which ultimately led to me going to War College, and then after War College to SOCOM and U.S. Central Command to stand up the SpaceCom integrated planning element. And why that was, the importance there is, as we have, for 20 years, we have fought in this low intensity conflict, the counterterrorism world, and where we had space and how it was integrated within the DS4, typically within the CFAC or within the Air Component Command, was the right paradigm. Correct at the time, we fought very well. Space was able to integrate and provide, that critical enabling capabilities to allow those warfighting commands to be more effective and efficient in their ability to shoot, move, and communicate. But I think as a DoD, I think we have seen our adversaries adapting their future concepts and their future strategies and how they're going to fight and win, try to fight and win against us with the A2AD strategy. We realized that space within the only touch point really for space was at that Air Component Command, and we must bring that higher to the strategic level. You need that strategic connection from the national defense strategy down into the combatant commands, that will eventually from the strategic level down into the operational and tactical level. And so for me, standing up those two elements really brought to fruition that we're evolving, because we can't, if we become stagnant, that's where we become irrelevant and that's where we lose. But we're evolving space integration from that operational level within the Air Component Command to the strategic level up at the GCC, the Geographic Combatant Command, because that is how we enable space across all of the components, down through echelon, down to the lowest tactical levels. And you've got to have that linchpin or the connection of space from the combatant command back to the strategic level or the strategic national level policies and directives.
That's very helpful. Can you talk about your relationship to U.S. Space Command in particular?
Yes, sir. So I worked directly for U.S. Space Command. I was not only the integrated planning element for Space Command within those two GCCs. I was General Dickinson, or before I was General Raymond's and then General Dickinson's liaison officer and spokesperson into those two GCCs. So the rough part was, between three combatant commands of Space Command, U.S. SOCOM, and U.S. Central Command, managing battle rhythm between all three, but being present across all of the working groups and the times that they would meet. We call them B2C2WGs, boards, bureaus, cell centers, working groups. It's really those touch points in a fusion targeting process to ensure the equities across all three combatant commands are being represented, to each other equally and with the same amount of importance. So for me, working directly for U.S. Space Command and integrating space within those two other GCCs was what I was doing.
Fantastic. What is the ops tempo for Army Space Forces nowadays? And can you give us some examples of some of the more interesting operations that have been undertaken or more impactful operations that you have underway or were conducted recently?
Yes, sir. So our ops tempo is, I will say it's through the roof. That's a good thing. And the reason why I say that is for those units that are training in something highly specialized that's unique from something they'd ever seen before in the Army, and to go out and then employ their trade, and when they deploy and employ their capabilities, we see job satisfaction, we see morale, we see that's all great things, and it's kept our re-enlistment numbers high. We actually, across all of my re-enlistment categories, we were, between 150 to 300% over this year for re-enlistment. And I think that is directly attributed back to our op tempo. And I say that also from when I took the Space Battalion a few years ago, we had one unit that wasn't being actively engaged in the fight. It was just a unique capability, and they would train and spend years training and never deploy and never get to use their trade craft. And that company had some of the lowest morale and the highest discipline issues across my entire formation. But towards the end of my 2 years of command, we started to deploy that element, and you saw the discipline issues drop. You saw job satisfaction. You saw morale, go through the roof, and soldiers were really, really happy. Don't get me wrong, it is difficult to leave your families. I spent my first 10 years as an artillery officer And for those 10 years, I was at home with my wife. The other 6, I was deployed. And that does have a wear and tear, and so we're very, very cognizant of that as well. But to date, we haven't seen that ops tempo really detract from. We have high marriage rates, where our divorce rates are some of the lowest in the Army. Our re-enlistments are some of the highest in the Army, and so I would say it's been beneficial for us. Space is it's a great domain to be in right now, and soldiers are loving every bit of it. As far as some of the more interesting deployments we've been able to execute, we have enduring rotations of some of our capabilities into the CENTCOM AOR and also into the INDOPACOM AOR. We see additional requirements coming down here in the near future for the EUCOM, and so that's exciting to be a part of. We had responsibilities and efforts within Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait. A lot of that during the CENTCOM counterterrorism years, and I'm very, very prideful of that and our contributions to SOF and conventional forces in the fight against ISIS and Al Qaeda, and without question, there were space officers and space professionals, not just from the Army, but from the Space Force, and then used to be Air Force Space Command, that contributed to the downfall of those two terrorist organizations. And so for me, it's been pretty exciting. I never understood the reach and the sphere of influence that space had as a young artillery officer. But as a space professional in the Army, you get to see that and experience that every day. And we still have a very, very valid and useful part of the fight, whether that's against counterterrorism or in global great power competition, or in, hopefully not, but in conflict as well.
That's great. Thank you. You mentioned briefly Project Convergence. Could you tell us about the involvement of your organization and Army Space Forces more broadly in Project Convergence? And what are some of the key aspects of Project Convergence that apply to, say, Joint All-Domain Operations or Joint All-Domain Command and Control in particular? Where do you fit in the movie, so to speak?
Yes, sir. So I think in Project Convergence, it's one of the core tenets that in the Army's warfighting concept of multi-domain operations. The actual project, I think, is how we turn that concept into a reality. It helps ensure that the Army, as a whole, and as a part of that joint fight, can rapidly, continuously integrate or converge effects across all domains, and that's air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. All with the focus to overmatch our adversaries in competition or in conflict. And so to get to the crux of your question is, where do I see us as the Army, Army space professionals tying in? It's really across all the domains. If there is, space and cyber, we have responsibilities, and we have that connective tissue in each of those domains, and it's critically important that we're a part of each of those domains. As we used to set a theater, for example, with air superiority, and then you can gain that through not only the Air Force, but also the Army's air defense artillery capabilities. You also have the Navy and their long-range fires, to remove, suppression of enemy air defense, and the Army does that with its long-range fires as well. But to establish air superiority and that supremacy was critical to enable freedom of maneuver and movement on maritime and on land. But now, as we have seen our adversaries and those strategies once again, to set a theater, we're going to have to set the theater with space and cyber many, many months, if not years in advance of phase 1 operations, because then that will enable air superiority, and then which will enable future, ground or land and maritime superiority as well. And so I think that's how space integrates across. It's not just in the information advantage. It's more, in joint long-range fires. It's in command and control. It's contested logistics. I think the Army, I say Army space, but space in general has ties and an important, not only enabling capabilities, but also to be enabled across those four arenas.
That's great. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about the status of modernization efforts underway within Army space? Does the current budget environment allow you to keep ahead of the threats? And are there specific areas where defense industry should be developing solutions for your current or future needs? And could you describe those a little bit? Give us a little foreshadowing on where you see some of your greatest needs. And so if you're sitting in the, if you're watching this and you're in company X and you have some internal research and development dollars that are available, where would you put the marginal dollar, if you will?
Yes, sir. And so I appreciate that, and I can tell you really from the brigade lens on the modernization efforts as we grow and transform in my formation. I think we are well underway to move, and we are moving in the right direction. We are growing in our ability to provide non-kinetic effects and to be enabled. So the supporting relationships between combatant commands. I see that improving every day. I would say our budget, I haven't seen any real budget impacts to my formation. I have several, modernization efforts going on between three of my companies, and they are all on glide slope. We're not behind, I believe, from many of our adversaries in those three company capabilities. So for me, I think we're moving in the right direction for the brigade and below. Areas where the industry, should be developing solutions for current and future needs. I'll switch back more to my navigation warfare hat, and even into, what I've seen at the tactical, operational, strategic levels from those exercises or deployments that we've been on. I think we need to, as an enterprise, develop more redundant means of communication. More redundant means of position navigation and timing data. We should grow capabilities in that, for a number of years, and there's even quite a few of our assets still today that they are solely relying on GPS. That's their only source of PNT, and if that is removed on the battlefield, it's really a single point of failure for that capability. And so that's where, I would say, if you could say, it keeps me up at night, is some of those areas where we are singularly reliant, which makes that single point of failure if it's removed in a fight, whether that's conflict or competition, or competition or conflict, I should say. Communications, most definitely figuring out different ways to communicate. I think that I've seen things with laser as a medium to communicate, which is fascinating as we continue to develop that. And we move from the old ways of communicating, and we have to transform and evolve to stay in front of our adversaries.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. The Army is the U.S. military's biggest consumer of space services. For example, the Army buys thousands of satellite receivers for Army troops to access GPS and satellite imagery and communications for ground operations. What are some of the key Army priorities related to space services, and whether from your vantage point or up the echelon?
Yes, sir. So I'm briefly hitting on it in the previous question. So some of those priorities is exactly that, alternate forms of communication, alternate forms of position navigation and timing, and then alternate forms of, imagery or sensors. Because that's really the, leading back to, that project convergence within multi-domain operations is really, it's the sensors, it's the shooters, it's the command and control nodes, it's, all with, the not just the authorities, but the hardware and software capabilities that in near real time that we can support, the current operations. We induce multiple dilemmas to our adversaries. We force them more into a decision paralysis. And so for us, what I see, to get back to your question, is where are some of our priorities is just in those areas. It's not just position navigation and timing. It's imagery. It's alternate forms of communication, alternate forms of intelligence to build that true picture in multi-domain operations to effectively, deny our adversaries the same freedom of maneuver and movement that we enjoy today.
I want to come back to personnel-related issues we touched on earlier. What's your anticipation as to how many Army space professionals may decide to join the Space Force? You know, what do you see as what do your colleagues see as some of the draw to joining the Space Force versus remaining in the Army?
Yes, sir. So to start with your second part first, I think some of the draw for a lot of us is to be on the ground floor, right? To really set the foundation, and some of the capabilities I mentioned earlier with some of our transformation that we're doing here in the brigade is to have your fingerprint on something that in 20 years from now we're still fighting that way, or we're evolving, but you can look back to your lineage. And that's what we all, aspire, I think, to have is what's our legacy or our lineage in the Army, or in the DoD. And I think that's the biggest pull, I think, for most folks from the Army over to the Space Force is really to help them establish a new service that, in 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we can look back and say, I was there on day one, or I was there, in the first year of its existence and helped establish the way we fight and win in that future fight. As far as the numbers that I've seen, in my almost 1,500 folks in the brigade, I had about approximately 60 applications to transfer. Out of that 60, we only had 3 that were selected. And so I would say the percentages are pretty low, the folks that want to make that transition over. I think a lot of that was due to the unknowns, but I think as Space Force becomes more and more solidified, I really do see an increase in the desire to make that transition over.
Thank you. Let's turn to a hot topic, obviously, which is media reports have indicated that some Army space resources, whether personnel, units, funding, may or may not shift to the Space Force in the coming years. Can you provide any additional insights as to which units and personnel may be transferring to the Space Force and when? And in your opinion, is there a compelling rationale, in fact, for transferring these and other units into the Space Force?
Yes, sir. And so as far as the units that are shifting to the Space Force, we are already tracking now that the Satellite Operations Brigade that I mentioned briefly earlier, that brigade with its battalion, the 53rd Signal Battalion, they are in line to transition beginning in FY22. So 1 October is the mark on the wall, and they will begin that very deliberate and methodical transition over the Space Force. It is not just a 1 October, pull the rug out, mission's all yours. There is going to be a very deliberate process to ensure that critical capability and those assets are handed off, and that transition is seamless and as smooth as possible. I think that what the compelling rationale for that was that really with that battalion and that brigade really conducts the payload and transmission control of the Defense Satellite Communication System and its replacement, WGS, the wideband global SATCOM system. And that WGS is used by all combatant commands as well as various 9 actually partner countries. They support wideband, narrowband services, for SpaceCom, and oversees that international partner, SATCOM agreements. And so, what we as the Army, came to realization is that system is a predominantly space-based capability. It resides in the SpaceCom AOR, and it's more appropriate to be aligned underneath the Space Force. And I think that helps us to be, fiscally responsible and frugal with, a reducing budget. And we also we remove those redundancies or the inefficiencies, I should say. Nothing wrong with having redundancies, but we remove the inefficiencies of not only people and equipment, but also what I mentioned earlier is the fiscal inefficiencies. And as far as what I see in my brigade transferring over, there has been discussions for JTAGs, the Joint Tactical Ground Station. What that is, it's the assured missile warning capability that is forward stationed. I've got 4 of them, one in Qatar, one in Italy, one in Korea, and one in Japan. Those are in theater, direct downlink from the overhead persistent infrared satellites. And then the processing, the first to detect, first to report is provided to those tier one, really the higher level command and control nodes within those theaters. As the Space Force has SBIRs, which they run through the Missile Warning Center in Buckley here in Colorado, I think we realized that there might have been some inefficiencies and some over redundancies between the two services. And so nothing is set in stone yet. I know there has been more of a handshake agreement that we were going to begin this process, but for the Army and the Space Force, we both agreed that we would let the SatOps Brigade transition first and not try to do too much at one time. We're not rushing to failure. Let that transition to the SatOps happen. We'll take those lessons learned and those key critical functions that should have transferred, and we want to make sure it's even more smooth when we do something like assured missile warning transition over. So as far as timelines for us, we've been told as early as fiscal year 23 out to fiscal year 26. And so in that window is really what we're looking at. But until then, we'll continue to execute and operate those critical assets, the forward deployed, forward stationed assets. And we've already started to have conversations as well with Space Force folks, my counterparts over in the Space Force, to begin dialogue and make sure that we have, once again, a very, very smooth transition of an asset that's critically important to those geographic combatant commands.
That's great. Thank you. How does the increasing availability of some of the newer commercial space capabilities impact your set of missions today? And how might it in the future, if you look at Starlink for communications or a whole host of other new, largely commercially funded and driven architectures, et cetera, constellations? And to what extent is the Army leveraging commercial space capabilities across various mission areas?
Yes, sir. So that's one of the things I was discussing earlier is finding the ability to build redundant space capabilities and alternate forms of communication or imagery, position navigation and timing, and that's really I think the strength of the U.S. and our partner nation space enterprise is the commercial industry. Part of that research I did during War College, I was looking at how the commercial industry can help augment and facilitate and really push us even faster in evolving our capabilities for that future fight. And we see it every day. You mentioned Starlink and the global communication capability that Elon Musk and his team have developed. That not only provides us, comms, it also provides us alternate sources of position navigation and timing as well. And so there are multiple things that I think within the U.S. Department of Defense and our partner countries in their commercial industries, we can really the synergy between those sectors truly makes us strong, and I think stronger than our near peer adversaries as well.
Thank you. The joint warfighting concept of the department identifies 4 subcomponents that cross service boundaries, and you touched on some of these earlier: joint long-range fires, joint command and control, contested logistics, and information advantage. What's the Army's role in information advantage, for example, today, and how do you see that role evolving over time?
Yes, sir. So information advantage, and those other 3 tenets as well, those concepts or subcomponents, I should say, critical in how we fight multi-domain operations, fight and win in multi-domain operations. With respect to information advantage, it's just not our advantage. How do we gain the advantage is removing, information or degrading information that our adversary can use against us as well. And so I think there are offensive and defensive components to information advantage. One, the offense is how we can, take that away from our adversaries, and on the defense is how do we gain and maintain, that advantage as well. And so within Army space, and really within space in general, with various capabilities and the non-kinetic effects that we can produce, I think we have offensive and defensive ties and responsibilities to ensure information advantage in that future fight. Because as I mentioned before, within the Russian and Chinese A2AD strategy, they see information as the critical linchpin to impact or to take away from the U.S. or from our the coalition, because as the in the Russian doctrine, that to remove our eyes, ears, and an ability to speak on the battlefield would result in the U.S. going back to World War II style fighting. And so information advantage is a critical part of that, but also those other three components equally as important. And as I mentioned before, space touches every one of those. And if someone thinks that they don't, then they're probably someone that shouldn't be making decisions. They're all critically reliant on space, and as such, we shoulder a very large responsibility to ensure not just the information advantage subcomponent, but joint long-range fires, command and control, and contested logistics are the most robust that they can be going into a future fight.
Absolutely. A question for you about threats. What are the threats that you're most worried about from whether it's Russia or China or others? What keeps you up at night, if you will, in being able to perform your mission?
So that's a very good question. I would say the threats that we see within Russia and China, their counter space capabilities, that concerns me more and more every day. Some of those assets, they call them dual use, but or they call them singular use. Grappler, for example, could be a dual use capability that looks peaceful. It's going up, removing debris from space, but there could be a darker side to its function as well. So I would say what keeps me awake at night is more of the non-kinetic counter space capabilities, because I think Russia and China also value the space domain. And if they go kinetic in the space domain, the debris fields and really removing a global common would unite the world against them. And I think any country would be foolish to try to go kinetic in the space domain. However, they are clearly preparing for that. And I think that's part of a deterrence or a coercive strategy that our countries, we develop against our adversaries and they develop back against us. But it's really the non-kinetic counter space capabilities that I worry about. And I worry that it's really hard to see their indication and warning that they're about to be used. A kinetic capability, for example, an anti-satellite missile, it has to, there are certain things that they have to go through to prepare that missile for launch. And we can see those things, and those are good indications and warnings that things are about to happen. It's the non-kinetic capabilities that it's really hard to see an INW or an indication and warning that's going to take place. And so, whether that's, lasers or, some type of a microwave capability or electromagnetic, energy pulse capability, those are those things that do worry me the most.
Understand. We have a question from the audience on artificial intelligence. To what extent are AI capabilities being tested or fielded in Army space? How much do you know about AI? Is it impacting your mission today? Are you able to leverage AI, and if so, to what extent?
Yes, sir. So, so within my mission areas, we are not currently using AI, but it definitely is somewhere we need to move very quickly. Just with the amount of information that's available today, and as we move through our basic and intermediate and advanced target development to generate non-kinetic effects, as that dynamic, the environment is very dynamic and is always changing. And if we're still relying on analog ways to develop that intermediate, the basic, intermediate, and advanced target development, we're way behind the power curve in a very dynamic, fluid environment. And so for me, having AI a part of that processing of the intelligence as it were to come down to make sure that we are staying in front of our adversaries, or we're staying in line with the target sets that we are effectively trying to deny or degrade or disrupt. I think that's really where we need to be going. And I know the Army is moving in that route, and the DoD as a whole is really moving towards, how do we integrate artificial intelligence in the targeting, weaponeering, fusion process. I think also it's critically important too to stay in front of, as we've not just on the fires but the command and control piece, right? So using artificial intelligence to immediately recognize when we have some type of purposeful or non-purposeful interference, and letting that capability drive how we fight through a denied or degraded or disrupted environment, whether that's purposeful or non-purposeful, I think will be critical as we fight, in future contested environments. And also in just the information advantage. That's I think AI. I think all of us understand how critically important AI can be in information advantage.
That's great. I have a question for you, and then I'll ask if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make before we wrap up here in just a few moments. What excites you most about the future of Army space operations?
What excites me most about the future of Army space? One, I think we're on the cusp of becoming a branch. And so just like we talk about the field artillery, and the infantry, those are all branches in the Army. We're on the cusp of becoming a branch within the Army, just like electronic warfare, just like cyber did a few years ago. They became branches, and now it helps make them, it legitimizes them even more within not just the Army fight, but the joint and coalition, organizations and focus areas. And so for me, I think that's really exciting to hear the forward progress we've made with making Army space a branch. Two, I think another thing that really excites me is our growth. And it's our growth not just in the brigade, but the multi-domain task force and the multi-domain effects battalions as they grow, the theater strike effects group, and seeing where not just offensive and defensive space control capabilities are growing, are going to, I guess, be placed in both of those formations. But it's more than just that. We're missile warning and missile defense, and how space is all critically important to all of those functions across those two formations, because it is growing. And that means, we're on the ground floor. Even though we're 20 something years in, we're really on the ground floor of space. As we've recently said, it is a warfighting domain, and now as the Army evolves to making space a branch, and somewhere where we can recruit, train, professionally develop junior enlisted soldiers to be non-commissioned officers, junior officers to be senior officers in our Army, and eventually in the DoD as a whole. That's a really exciting part for me. I wish I could go back 12 years and relive everything all over again, and not just relive everything all over again, but if I could reset my clock and go back 12 years and stand even longer in the Army in this career field, I would do it in a heartbeat, because we're only going up, and pun intended, and it's good.
That's fantastic. Well, why don't I turn the mic over to you here for any closing remarks you have, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, sir, I really do appreciate it. I'd say just in closing, I can't not miss an opportunity to dope more on my brigade and what we do here, not only in the brigade, but also across all of Army space. We continue to train and deploy, not just from the brigade, but from all echelons across the Army. Those space professionals, we push them out into the Army, into joint and coalition formations, really focused on the tactical and operational aspects, because we see how important, the lower levels of warfare are, and how connected we must be, to the Space Force and their really strategic focus, and all efforts to preserve a commander's ability to shoot, move, and communicate, to disrupt our adversaries' freedom of action, and to ensure, the freedoms that we enjoy every day continue to be those freedoms we enjoy in the future. So I really do appreciate this opportunity. I've really, really enjoyed this moment today. It's one of my very first interviews. It's actually one of my first panels that I've ever been able to participate on. And so, sir, thanks for this opportunity. And I look forward to doing others in the future. And if there's ever any questions that you or your audience has about the Space Brigade, please, or Army Space in general, please send them my way. I enjoy conversation. I enjoy teaching and mentoring and coaching, and it's all great opportunities, and I would appreciate that.
Well, you do it very well. You're obviously very passionate about your role and mission and your troops. So well done. Colonel Donald Brooks, Commander, 1st Space Brigade, U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for our audience as well. And with that, we'll call it a wraps. Thank you so much, sir, and good luck to you. Thanks for your service.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.